Good morning, everyone. This is Jed from TechSoup. I'll be the facilitator for today's webinar. We aren't starting yet, don't worry. However, this is just a 5-minute reminder. We will be beginning in about 5 minutes. So just sit back, relax, and we'll let you know as we begin. And talk to you again in a bit. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Jed again. I am from TechSoup. Thank you for joining. We've got a massive, sorry, we've got a massive registration for this webinar. So again, thank you very much. Again, you are in the Fundraising 101 webinar, Growing Your Donor Network. And just before we begin, quick house rules. Number one is the recording and decks will all be provided after. So don't worry if you miss some parts of it or if you have colleagues that are unable to join. We will be providing the links to all of the materials after the webinar. Next, you are muted all throughout as is standard for a webinar. However, if you do have questions, please feel free to type it in through the chat or to the questions panel. We will be answering all of them at the end of the discussion. And that is as well number three, all Q&A will be done at the end just to make sure we cover all of the content first. And last but not the least, this is my favorite rule, to be honest. No stupid questions. Again, this is a safe space for you. This is a space for everyone to learn. If you're curious about anything, just let us know and we'd be happy to answer it. So just moving forward, we'll now be essentially starting the session. So just briefly before we begin, just a quick overview of the speakers that we have for today. Starting the morning off will be Rodney Heng. He is the Managing Director of CSG, and he has done a lot of work with nonprofits, whether it's small to large organizations. He's helped them essentially increase their fundraising revenue campaigns. Following him is Melanie McLaren, Interim Executive Director for Justice for Hong Kong. She will be providing a unique perspective on the learnings as well, essentially blending her background in both the investment banking sector and the NGO sector as well. And last but not the least, for those of you who've joined us in our previous event in Singapore, you may already know him. He's Greg Simmons. He's Senior Manager for International Development and International Partner Development for Blackbaud. And also, he's the co-founder of a very successful fundraising campaign called the Special Olympics Ku-ring-gai Chase Fun Run. Again, we've got a pretty stacked session today. So without further ado, I will stop talking now, and I would like to pass this on to our first speaker, Rodney.
Thank you, Jed. Okay, let me see if I can show my screen. There we go.
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Rodney.
And I hope it's showing for everyone. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar. And I'm just going to dive in. Only 20 minutes, so just highlights, I'm afraid, but I hope helpful highlights for you. And the agenda for today would be, I'm just going to do a quick introduction on Catalyst for Social Good, CSG. And then after we've done that, we're going to go into some global giving trends with specific look at Asian countries, specifically the countries of our attendees today. I can look at the registration list. I will go through, highlight some of the countries. And next, I suppose, I would like to show you a little bit about developed country trends, taking the lead from or insight into the US and UK markets. They usually are the global leaders in terms of development work. And also to give you a little bit of a more Asian flavor data, taking some data from Hong Kong example, okay, the giving trends. So if you have any questions, I'm going to see if I can open some questions. Anyway, I think questions. So plugging on about worked with quite a selection of charities, both NGOs and local charities. I suppose not self-explanatory here would be RNIB, which is the Royal National Institute for the Blind in the UK, and Childline is Childline Thailand. They're based in Bangkok, and it's a sister charity to the Hub in Hong Kong, which is a Children and Youth Center. Childline is a hotline and a Children and Youth Center in Thailand. And the others, I mean, there has been a few cancer charities. We are working with Anti-Cancer Society as well as today, of course, Melanie from Justice Center Hong Kong, who will talk to you a little bit more about the work we're doing with her and also her fundraising strategy. So I think Red Cross, Greenpeace, Save the Children, and MSF is pretty global names, so I won't go into them too much explanation. All right. Some notable achievements, I suppose, of what I've done for some of my clients includes some of these direct marketing mailing campaigns for Red Cross, MSF, Cancer Fund, where we have more or less double to triple their revenue for their direct mailing campaigns, and these are in Hong Kong dollars. All right, and in terms of organizationally, I did lead the Save the Children portfolio in Hong Kong, and during my tenure there, the income increased, 3 times, I suppose, in 4 years. So that's quite nice. And we've also turned around some of the local NGOs finances. All right. A little bit about CSG. CSG has been a relatively young organization, I suppose. We're coming up to about 1.5 years of operation, and we focus a little bit more on trying to get unrestricted income for charities. Very important that, as it pays the overhead bills like salaries and rent, etc. So we do try and leverage some of our expertise with INGOs working with INGOs for the local charities as well, smaller local charities as well, because we believe that that's where we can add a lot of value to the market. All right, and as a result, we do focus quite a lot on individual giving, and how we do that is we do work a lot with data and data analytics. All right. What we do is we get insights from data, and we fuse that insights into the campaigns, how we push the campaigns out, and also directly into the campaigns as well. All right. And because there's so much analytics and data involved, a database or a CRM platform is essential. And of course, Greg is here to tell you a little bit more about eTapestry today. All right. CSG also does implement eTapestry, so we've worked with the platform, and I've also consulted to implement Salesforce. So eTapestry is a pretty robust solution, especially for small to medium-sized organizations. All right, and in terms of fundraising campaigns, we run our campaigns across all channels, integrated engagement, okay, both digital and real life. Right? We use multiple channels to engage with the audience. Okay, so that, in a nutshell, is what CSG focuses on. I'm just going to dive into the global data on giving trends. CSG does do benchmarking for our clients in Asia Pacific region, but of course, there's a lot of NDAs in relation to doing those data analysis work. So I'm not able to share those with you today, but what I've done is I've extracted from some of the freely available reports that you can access online. Okay. Reference CAF, Charity Advice Funds World Giving Index, right? And the link is over here. It's a free report. Okay. CAF is one of the largest grant-making organizations in the US, and they do global research, okay, on all countries. So they publish this World Giving Index on giving propensities in all 126 countries in the world. All right. What the report looks into for the population in each of the country to give, to help a stranger, to donate money, to give money, and to volunteer their time. Okay, and the poll goes to 1.3 million individuals, and it has been done in the past 10 years. All right, this is done by Gallup. Okay. So just some of the key highlights and facts from the index. We do see quite a lot of Asian presence rising in the index. You can see Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia represented there. Indonesia, it highlights most improved country. Okay, more people in Indonesia helping a stranger at any time in the last 10 years. Singapore is a close third place. Okay, and biggest rises with half being Asian. So given our audience here today, I believe we are represented by Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. I suppose this set of data might be of interest to you. Okay, so looking into the index table, I've just extracted here. You can see Indonesia is placing 10. Okay, pretty highly. And in terms of, that's overall ranking. And in terms of specific financial contribution, the population to give is ranked 6, right? So pretty highly. And next is Thailand at ranked number 21, and propensity to give is ranked 4th. So it's quite a significant improvement there in terms of money. Talking about money, Malaysia 30th, 24th, Singapore 46th but 21st, right? And even Philippines at 33rd and 63, Vietnam and 84th and 65th, right? These are of 126 countries. So quite good representation, I would say, out of all of the 126 countries. We are aging up to the upper half of the index. So you know, most of you would be quite well placed in terms of fundraising in your countries, as you know, the propensity to give, the population propensity to give seems to be increasing and not too bad, right? Now, just diving into the trend, like I said, these are data from the US and the UK. Okay. And I am from Giving USA report. It's one of the longest running and most comprehensive report from the States, and it's researched by the Indiana University. All right. So highlights from the report is that despite being a mature market, the US, they are still growing. Okay, yeah, it's about 5%. And I don't know, it might be a surprise to some of you, but that individual giving represents 70% of giving in the US. Not corporates, not foundations, but individuals. All right. So I think to some of you that might be a interest point, a point of interest data. Okay. Foundations and corporates are still there, but they account for the other 30% of giving. So let's have a look at the breakdown of figures. Giving by individual has estimated of 287 billion. You can see foundations drops down to 67 billion. Bequest, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with bequest, but bequest is when you give through your wills. That drops down to 36 billion, and corporations rounding off the rear at about 21 billion. All right. So that's how the giving pie breaks down pretty much in the US. Okay. That's the lead, that link to the report, which you can access in more detail. Okay. Now for the UK, extracted from, which is a network of 450 organizations across global poverty, inequality, and injustice causes in the UK. Okay. And you can see here the breakdown in the UK is largest proportion is from individual giving. Okay. And if we look, if we count events such as earned fundraising income, they classified this as admission fees for fundraising events, selling donated goods. That is about 7%. So, I mean, most of these are from individuals anyway. So if you tally those up, it comes to about 38, I would say, %. Okay, so that's individual, and then government comes next. Government grants, government contracts. Okay, contract grants. Contract is when government subcontracts to NGOs to deliver services. And you're looking at about a total from the government sources at about 33%. Okay. Earn is service and exchange for a fee. All right. So that's the proportion there. And corporates rounding up the rear with foundations is the classified here as blue. Here, independent trusts and foundations, this segment. All right. So you can see the breakdown over here in the UK. Okay. So like the grants and contracts are a strong source of income. Interestingly, a lot of government grants have flowed to larger NGOs, and smaller ones are not receiving such a large share of the government grants. So you might have to grow using other sources of revenue before you can get the government grants. And interestingly, even though there's been stagnation in some of the financial growth, we are seeing individual giving contributing, showing strongly for smaller organizations, as well as events showing strongly for smaller organizations. Okay, individual giving is still the largest source of income and has grown steadily. Okay, a lot for larger organizations. So if you look at the data in this graph, as segmented, the different organizational sizes here. Okay, so these are organizations from 0 to 500K and so on. Okay, so these are the larger organizations up here. You can see the basically fundraising portfolio breakdown, if you would. You can see here how each of the different organizational segments and sizes breaks down in terms of their fundraising portfolio, what they have received. And in the UK, being a relatively mature market, you can see larger organizations quite diversified in their revenue sources. Okay, and even the smaller ones are actually diversifying their revenue sources with quite a bit in individual giving and quite a bit in fundraising events, which is events basically. All right, and smaller parts. So that's a relatively good strategy always to diversify your revenue sources across the different sources, but focusing more on where the segments are largest. All right. And this is just presenting the data in another format. Okay. Now I'm running out of time. Just going to skip through it quickly now. Giving trends in Hong Kong, so a bit of an Asian flavor of the data. It's a little bit difficult to get compiled reports for Asia. So what I've done is I've gone into the annual reports of some of the charities in Hong Kong to give you an insight. And here is Red Cross. All right. Red Cross fundraising team earns about 104 million per annum, Hong Kong dollars that is, and about 96 million of that, of the 103, are unrestricted donations, right? So these are donations they can use as the organization deems it. So this is a very high proportion of unrestricted donations. And why is that? That's because they do have 40,633 regular donors. That's where they say here, regular donors at 40,633. So if you are to multiply the number of donors by 12 months by the average gift in the Hong Kong market, which is about $100 to $150 around there, you do get an annual revenue for the organization at about 73 million. Okay, and that probably comes up to about 70% from monthly giving. Okay, 73 million out of the 103 million, so that's about 70%. And if you add in the events income, etc., from individuals, it brings it to about 88% from individuals. See, so very high proportion from individuals in Hong Kong for Hong Kong Red Cross. Oxfam, similar. Okay, and see the total revenue income here at 253 million, and Oxfam Partners is their regular giving. Monthly donation here is called Oxfam Partners, and it's at 160 million. Okay, and so if you divide that up, you get 63% coming from regular giving alone. Okay, and if you add their partners, trail walkers, all of their events income, they will bring it up to about 81% of their income undesignated. Okay, so individuals account for quite a big proportion of their fundraising revenue. Plan Hong Kong, Australian organization, for those who are not a children's organization, familiar. Okay, so total revenue is about 88 million in total. Child sponsorship program is their regular giving, okay, and it's 75 million. So that's about 85% of their total portfolio. All right, so that is 85%, pretty significant. Okay, restricted income is only about 14.9%, which is, I believe, this amount. Okay, so they are at about 85% deriving their income from individuals. Cancer fund, you can see their monthly donations year-on-year growth here from the past 5 years, okay, and 56 million, and their total organization income is 121 million. Okay, so they are only sourcing about 50%, 47% from monthly donors. Okay, but they are also having about 28% from their fundraising events. So again, very high proportion from individuals, events, and monthly donations. Okay, which accounts for about 99.7% of their donations coming in as unrestricted. All right, so this is how you solve the unrestricted income issue for organizations. Okay, I'm not going to go into cancer fund, but similar. The story is similar there. A big proportion from individuals. Okay, and here's a summary of the data over here. So undesignated across all of the listed organizations at these proportions. Okay, designated income, mostly from corporates and foundations, at this percentage, and individuals are estimated at around here. Okay, and corporate and foundations are over here. All right. So summary is both developed countries and Asian countries, organizations should probably focus quite a lot more of their effort on individuals giving, because monthly programs, in particular, give you a stability of cash flow, okay, and the degree of restriction is generally unrestricted. Whereas government, family, foundations, and corporates, not so stable in terms of their cash flow, and pretty restricted in terms of restrictions. So that is pretty much my presentation. I think I've gone over time already. Okay, you can contact me here, and my website is over there. Our website is over there. And just a quick click through some of the samples of work. You can see Greenpeace, this survey, this cancer fund, there's an appeal letter. Okay, and Justice Center here, digital campaign. All right, Jed, back to you. I hope that was helpful for everyone and
Awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rodney. So again, guys, just a quick reminder before we move on to Melanie, please do send your questions through chat or the questions panel, and we'll be answering all of them at the end of the session. Again, thank you very much, Rodney. And now let's move on to our next speaker, Melanie McLaren. Okay, give us a second. There you go.
Great. Is this working now? You can see my screen?
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Melanie.
Perfect. Okay, well, I am Melanie McLaren, and as I was introduced, I am currently the Interim Executive Director for Justice Centre Hong Kong. Prior to that, for the last 5 years, I've been acting as the Head of Fundraising and Development. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of background on our organisation, just so you get an idea of the scale, the sort of area of work that we engage in, and historically where we have fundraised from. And then following on with the theme of Rodney's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about why and how we have decided to branch out into individual giving and why we think this is the most sensible approach for our long-term stability. So Justice Centre Hong Kong is a relatively small domestic Hong Kong NGO. We were founded in 2007, and we work on human rights issues. We provide direct assistance to refugees, asylum seekers, and human trafficking victims. We've got about 18 members of staff, although probably around half of those are part-time staff members. And our annual income it's around between $600,000 and $800,000 US per annum. So looking at the breakdown of that income in the past, I mean, this is just a snapshot of the picture before we started this campaign, but historically you can see significantly the largest two proportions of our income came from corporate donations and from foundation grants. So we're actually ineligible for any government funding. So further to Rodney's point around thinking about whether government funding is the most sensible for your organization, some organizations are not actually eligible. So we are not, because we don't work with Hong Kong citizens, just as an example there. We have a small proportion of income from educational programs that we run, specific to the sort of area of work that we do. And then the other 2 points that I wanted to flag are the 4% from fundraising events and 7% from individual giving, which is actually pretty low compared to our peers. So I will just flick onto the next slide, which talks about where Justice Centre sits in relation to some of the other NGOs in Hong Kong and internationally. And this, I think, sort of fits with what Rodney was saying, and that most of the large NGOs derive most of their income, if not all, from events, individual giving, regular giving, including our local peers. I've only included one here, but we did a survey of 5 or 6, and all the other organisations of broadly similar size and similar mandate to Justice Centre actually received almost all of their income from individual giving in Hong Kong. We have never focused on this traditionally for a number of reasons, but mostly because I think financially it's a significant commitment. In 2018, we made a somewhat half-hearted commitment to individual giving, where we employed a member of the fundraising and development team to focus on individual giving. But at that time, we did not have the budget to actually invest in wider systems around that. And so it was not a very successful program. One person with limited access to media buy, outreach, data, unfortunately can have a very limited impact. So that did not move the dial very much on our individual giving history. So I think this has been a long time coming, our decision, but we decided sort of middle of last year that we would make the decision to invest in individual giving to ensure long-term stability for the organization. So this is broadly in line with what Rodney said. I mean, some of the reasons that we decided to make the leap were particularly around the unrestricted use of the funds. Where we have mostly had corporate and grant funding, there have been gaps between the sorts of funding, or if we've wanted to do pilot projects, these aren't necessarily appropriate for grants. And we've really struggled to find the income to fill these. Again, as Rodney said, where you have multiple small donors, there's significantly less churn to your individual, to your overall donation. So if we had 5 or 6 significant grants from the UN, from international donors that were several hundred $1,000, losing even one of those has a huge hit on our income. And there have been years where we've lost 2 or 3. So the benefit of having multiple small donors is, even if you lose, and you would expect to lose, I imagine 5 to 10% a year, 5 to 10% of a small number is much easier to claw back through other small donors versus trying to then find another grant or another corporate that's prepared to donate $200,000 US, which is a much longer term, bigger picture proposition. So I think the predictability and the regular income stream is very important to us, and also the scalability of the program. The approach that we decided to take, as I mentioned earlier, we tried previously to employ a staff member to carry out individual giving on their own, and we were not ultimately very successful in that. So what we ended up doing was employing Rodney through CSG, his consultancy, to actually undertake the individual giving campaign. And as a small to medium-sized NGO, we thought this made by far the most sense, because we wanted to be able to trial the product first. We didn't want to employ a full team of creative, of call center, of advertising specialists for the sake of our first ever campaign. We didn't have the knowledge in-house to be able to churn out these materials ourselves. And we didn't want to tie ourselves into long-term financial commitments and headcount if ultimately this proved to be unsuccessful. So we spent a long time talking to Rodney around how it would work, and alongside the consultancy, we also invested in a data solution. I think you'll probably hear a little bit more about this further on in the webinar, but certainly in terms of retaining and maintaining donors and understanding who is donating to us and why, we need to have the data around who's donating. And again, in the past, where we've had a number of donors, individual donors, sort of 5 to 7% of our income, we haven't really ever tracked who those donors are, how they found us, why they're donating, what their profile is. And actually that was one of the key questions I think that was raised when we first kicked off our individual giving campaign was, well, how do we know who to target it to? Because we have no data around who's given us money in the past. So what's the likely profile of future donors? So that was another reason we wanted to go with a consultancy, because they will have access to the proprietary data around the profiles of donors that will donate to specific sorts of causes. And obviously we hope that over time, as we are building our database of the people that are donating to us, we will have our own Justice Centre database and we'll be able to do our own targeting in the future. But it's been, I'd say, 3 or 4 months since we kicked off our campaign. So we're really very much in the early stages of starting that data-driven decision making. I think one thing I would stress is, and this is partly why it took us so long to decide, is that an individual giving campaign does require significant investment to be a success, and it needs to be thought of as a long-term project. So probably upwards of 2 years, I think, at least 1 year before you see a significant proportion of your income, or a reasonable proportion of your income coming in through individual donations. I mean, starting from 7%, I imagine it will be many years before we hit anything like the 80–90% of the international NGOs that we're comparing ourselves to, but we're already seeing off the back of the last few months our numbers grow, which is really optimistic and promising for us. So let me talk a little bit about the strategy that we undertook in conjunction with CSG, the consultancy. So we did effectively a 4-stage strategy. We worked with the consultancy and creative agencies to provide tailored content for around the work that Justice Centre does. We worked with a creative agency upfront, and we provided them our materials, and we trained a call center to come up with the sort of themes that might work best with the groups that we know donate to organizations like ours. Then we'd agreed, and this was a key benefit to us actually, a phased expenditure. So we spent money upfront on the creative, but once that had been developed and once the training had been done, we're now able to phase our expenditure in terms of media buy, in terms of call center costs, and that's incremental, so that the organization can spread out the sums over the course of the whole campaign, which is much easier for us as a small organization. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the targeted exposure is probably one of the most important things, and we've done this on a trial basis. So we put out, I think, about 6 to 8 campaigns initially with slightly different messaging into slightly different targeted audiences. And then off the back of that, we looked at the data as to who was responding to these campaigns and how many people were donating, the conversion rates. And then following that first sort of 3 or 4 weeks, we've then been able to put out a much more targeted campaign. And actually the conversion rates of those have been significantly better. So I think this all sort of ties into the data and looking at who's responding, what their profile is, and once you know, you can then push out and spend more money on driving your campaign towards those people that you know are likely to be donating to that cause. And once we've put out the campaign, we're asking people to give their details, to express interest. We're then following up with a call center, and the call center are able to answer questions about the organization. They can put them in touch with us if they have further questions, and hopefully translating a lot of those interests and leads into donations. And that is something that we have actually seen in reality. So just to give you a quick snapshot of the campaign that we launched, which was, I think it was back in October, November last year, so it hasn't been going that long, but we actually generated in a short period of time 2,000 leads up to about Christmas, and then a conversion rate in line of forecasts of, I think it was 4 to 6% of donations coming in every month. And that is continuing to grow as we push out the campaign. I think what we found in Hong Kong at the moment, we've had a few issues with disruption in terms of protests, and now we're seeing the coronavirus, so that is having some impact. But we are very much taking the approach that this is a long-term strategy, and whilst there will be highs and lows in the short term, we want to make sure that we can maintain organizational stability over the next 10 years, not necessarily the next 2 months. So we will definitely continue with the campaign, tweaking the data as required. I think a couple of lessons that we have learned, particularly in relation to comments on the social media, we've never put out a broad campaign before, and one thing that took us by surprise was that not all the comments on the campaign were positive. But then again, it comes back to the underlying numbers and the data, and actually we were still seeing positive returns and donations coming off the campaigns where people were perhaps posting critical comments about the sort of work we do. They weren't particularly bought into our motivations and our activities. And that, I think, feeds into the last point, which is that the quality of targeting is absolutely key. So if we're marketing our campaign at people that don't have an interest or a sympathy for the sort of causes that we are working on, then of course the campaign will not be a success. And so again, we're hoping as this increases, we'll get more data, this will be able to be more targeted, we'll get fewer negative comments and more income from the campaign. So that's really all I had to say on this. It's a brief overview of our rationale and our first steps into an individual giving campaign. It has performed well for us so far, but it's obviously early days, and we're hoping to be able to continue this over the next months, years, and hopefully increase our stability and organizational sustainability. So I will hand that back over. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you very much, Melanie. That was a very insightful session. So again, to those that are sending their questions in, thank you very much. We are now going to be switching to our last speaker, then off to answer all of your questions. So please do send your questions in so we can answer all of them at once after Greg. So now I'm going to pass this on to Greg. Give me a quick second. Hi, Greg.
Thanks, Jed. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, perfect.
Excellent, fantastic. All right. So first of all, thank you everyone for the opportunity to present today, and thanks to Jed for organising this. It's as I say, it's appreciated. So look, a little bit about me. I've been with Blackbaud just over 7 years, and I've really worked across all solution areas for Blackbaud, from eTapestry, which is a fantastic solution for small growing not-for-profits, through to Razor's Edge for more mature organisations, right through to our enterprise solution. So what Blackbaud does is we help not-for-profits improve their fundraising outcomes and really streamline their processes around managing their data around their constituents. And Blackbaud's been doing that for about 40 years, and we have about 40,000 customers worldwide, all really either charities, not-for-profit, social enterprises, and also funders of not-for-profits as well. So that's really what we do. We're the largest provider of cloud-based software to the social good sector. So we help good take over, as we say. And my own background, so I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she's 26, doing really well, and I've been on not-for-profit boards since she was about 6 months old. And also along the way, I co-founded a fund run that raises money for Special Olympics, which Jed pointed out. So I'm actually an eTapestry user in my own right, and our event is actually on the 15th of March. We have our launch tomorrow night, and so I'm actively as a volunteer using eTapestry regularly, and hence my love for the product. What Rodney and Melanie have provided is some really great insights, from a macro view, and right down to Melanie from a micro view. So what I wanted to do today is really touch on acquisition. So, some acquisition strategy and how ETAP supports. Melanie touched on the importance of tracking development of and retaining of donors. Having that data, capturing it, making sure it's good quality, so then when we use it in a campaign, we can get great results. But that does take time. And also, I'm going to finish off with really a little bit around reactivation, and then some resources that are available. So here we are in eTapestry, but before we have a look at eTapestry, I'm just going to take you to the Justice Hong Kong Centre Hong Kong donation page. So here we've got some gift information, how much we want to give. You'll notice here we've got donation frequency. So one time annually and monthly. For some of our customers, they actually default it to monthly. So actually to encourage their donors to come to the online donation form and actually give upfront and go straight to a recurring giver. Here we've got the ability, these are what's called DIY forms. So our customers can actually create and publish these forms themselves and actually include what they want to capture on it. Down to here we've got, so what we'll do is let's do a monthly and we'll click on a certain amount. And so what this form will do when we submit and when we actually take the donation, the credit card details, it will actually automatically through Blackbaud's payment processor process the transaction. It'll tokenize the credit card, put it in a secure vault, and it'll actually write the record back into eTapestry, including a gift record, which can then be used to do reporting for our finance team as well. So it really is a very integrated opportunity to streamline that acquisition process. Importantly, it's going to check for duplicates on the way in and those sort of things. And we've negotiated some fantastic rates in terms of the transaction fees. Other examples, there's this is an organisation that uses an online eTapestry form for capturing volunteers. So you get the picture. All this can be published and integrated back into your eTapestry system. So let's have a quick look at eTapestry. So here we've logged into the system and immediately we're getting a bit of a snapshot in terms of here's our donor retention rate and here's some significant lapsed donors that we may want to click into their record and have a look at their history. We've got email performance because we have integrated email marketing into eTapestry. And we also have campaign performance, approach performance, and fundraiser performance where we're actually bringing in data from peer-to-peer fundraising. So this truly is a snapshot of your overall different channels, different strategies. Because eTapestry is fit for purpose, it's been built for fundraising, it knows about things like average gifts, so you can track those things and be able to easily track new donors, etc. So, and also I've got my favorite reports, and we'll come back to our other areas of the dashboard in a minute. So we've logged in, and straight away on the phone is someone calling in, and it's actually Rachel Crossman. So here is our little Google for eTapestry. So we've got Rachel. Rachel's a volunteer, so she's got a little login details. We've had a tribute from Rachel's family, and so on and so forth. We can click in and do a little bit more information, and we can even do advanced find, which actually allows us to actually search any field in the database, including any that you create. So it's really capable, really broad capability there. So in this case, we've got Rachel. Rachel's on the phone. She's heard about our Wild Futures Fund, and she just wants to give us a gift straight off. So we can go straight into a gift record. We've noticed these little sticky notes, which gives us little clues and information about our constituents, and we'll see some other examples of that as we go through. We can capture pledges, but in this case, Rachel just wants to give us a $1,000 donation. Straight away, then it prompts us for what gift type. And if Rachel had her credit card ready, we could actually process this transaction right here and now. So it uses the same payment gateway as what we showed in the online form. Again, what we want to capture is, where the money's going. Is it unrestricted? Is it going to a project? How what the campaign was and what the approach. So when Melanie and Rodney touched on the data analytics, this is the start of this, that you just to be able to look at these different areas and actually analyze it. And importantly, the fund is also mapped to the general ledger code. So when we export transactions out of eTapestry into your financial, which can be either import, export, or integrated, then we actually capture that information to streamline processes for our finance team as well. Okay, so we could go ahead and process that transaction. So let's go back and have a look at a constituent record. So we sort of talked about that acquisition a little bit. Let's sort of talk about the tracking, the development and the retention. So we're going to have a look going down to here, and maybe of this organization, We may have, maybe it's Justice Centre Hong Kong, and the CEO or general manager has their own view. So they might just look at recent gifts that are greater than 5,000. And here directly on my dashboard is that information. So we maybe want to pick up the phone and actually say thank you to Aaron for his donation. So here's Aaron's record. You'll see that we can get a snapshot straight away of Aaron's contact details. You'll also know that eTapestry can store international character sets, which is really important. So we have customers across Asia, you know, from Malaysia through to Japan and all in between. So having the international character set is quite important. Let's go back to our dashboard. So perhaps Melanie's logged in to eTap in the morning, and we want to actually see, and we've got some other transactions, and maybe let's have a look at John Marshall as a constituent. So here we've got some important sticky information. So John is a childhood friend of our executive director, so that's really handy to know. You'll notice that John also looks at remarkably like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or a younger version of. But here we can see some giving history. We can see recognition information. We can see personas. So eTapestry has a concept of households. And before we pick up the phone to John, we may want to look at his giving history. So the lifetime giving for John is an incredible 286,000. His first gift was back in 2004. We can see his 5-year gift summary. We can also see recent interactions with John, from donations he's made to meetings we've had to phone calls, etc. So it's really starting to give us a snapshot of that. We can also track things like relationships. So for a high value donor, we may want to start capturing information about different organizations or relationships that John has, so we can track that, so we can influence. And finally, we're able to track and segment. So for, here we can track what's the nature of the relationship we have with John, and we can start to segment that information for use in our campaigns, down to interests, etc. Okay, so all that is trackable within the system. All right, let's move on because I'm starting to run out of time. So what I'm going to do is give you a bit of an actionable item. So we're now moving from tracking, development and retention into reactivation. What we find sometimes is when customers first import data into eTapestry, they can start to uncover some gems of people who have lapsed, given in the past, but we haven't even connected with them again for quite some time. So we can run our giving dynamics report. So I'm going to run this for the whole database, and I'm going to compare 2 periods. I'm going to compare 2014 with 2015. I can include in-kind gifts. You'll notice our reports can all be submitted and scheduled for off hours, so they can be run automatically and delivered to your inbox, which is a great option. So now I'm going to run this report, and it's giving me a nice little graph of my different categories of donors. Here's a little legend. If I'm a bit new to fundraising and I don't understand some of the concepts, here's a little legend to describe. So I have a group here who are donors that gave in the first period and also gave in the first time period of this particular area, but did not give in the second period. In other words, they've given some time in the past, but haven't given this year. So I'm going to focus in on that group, have a look at who's in that group. And what I can do is I can actually go away and create that as a little query. It can automatically create a query. What I can then do is go to my communications, and this is where I store all my templates for receipts and thank yous and newsletters. We've got drag and drop templates, as it says there. We can do some really neat things. And what I'm going to do is look at our lapse giving letter. And I'm going to do a mass email here. So I'm going to say I'm going to connect, and I'm going to use that example. And I'm going to select my lapsed other group. I can determine where it's going to be sent from, who in the organization. I can track the interactions, so it's on their record. And finally, it's going to tell me who this is going to go to, so I feel comfortable that I'm not going to send something out that's not going to the right people. And here's my nice little template. We miss you. Make your contribution this year. It's personalized, etc. So they could go out, and what we find is there's around 6 to 6.5% reactivation rate for lapsed donors. So it's a really a good way to get some quick wins as well as undertake our more long-term strategies. The final thing to close out on is just to draw out, there's a significant, because this is all we do, we can provide a whole lot of information and resources, best practice help, user guides. We've got access to online training videos, and we've got, things that we can look at. So, little how-tos and best practices, and there's a whole lot of documentation to help you that's all online. So with that, I will pass back to Jed.
Thanks, Greg. So, okay, that is it for all of our speakers. And now I am going to unmute all of our panelists, and time to go through the question and answer portion, actually. So I did get a few questions in, so let's go through them one by one. And for the panelists, if you can answer it, please feel free. And if you can add on to the existing answer, please feel free. So the first question I have here is, would love to get suggestions about how to approach individual donors. I didn't know that an individual donor is a good opportunity before.
I mean, maybe I jump in with
Yeah,
my experience on the two approaches that we've taken. So we, I think, also started with the view that we should be approaching individual donors when we hired someone in 2018. And we had very limited success because there's only so many approaches that an individual person can make. You don't really know who you're speaking to, whether they have an interest in your cause. It takes up a huge amount of time to even interact with that one individual person and have a conversation. I think there certainly is a place for face-to-face sort of relationship building in individual donors, or what we would call major gifts, particularly with high net wealth individuals. But typically that would involve building a relationship over months, even years, to build up to a significant donation. So what we ended up doing, as I talked about, was taking a very technology-driven approach and working with CSU, with the consultancy, and Rodney around pulling together a campaign that would go out on social media and go out digitally so that the maximum number of people would be able to see it with the minimum amount of actual time taken from our side. So that really worked best for us. I think where we tried to do a sort of a face-to-face, attending events, speaking at events even, we had very limited conversion rate in terms of the people that we spoke to. And the number of people we spoke to was so low that even if it was a high conversion rate, the overall number of donors would be pretty small. Rodney, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yes, so thanks for that, Melanie. I suppose the easy way to put this is that what you're looking for in terms of individual giving is you're looking for scale, you're looking for volume. So in essence, you're trying to go to as broad a market base as possible. That is the general public, basically. And you're trying to acquire from the general public out there those who would be interested in giving to your particular cause. So I mean, the strategy is in a way juxtaposing, because you want to be targeted, but you also want to be broad-based at the same time. So you basically, what you want to do is you want to go to as broad a base as possible, but in a targeted fashion, so that you funnel down the people that will you funnel down and identify the people that will contribute to your cause. And how you do that sort of acquisition exercise is what we call in fundraising terms, is that you use different channels. It could be digital, as in Melanie's case. It could be through the post office, through the mail. And the mail is very relevant for most Asian countries because of the geographic size of your country, right? And Hong Kong is very dense. So we digital and mail still works, but there are particularities of Hong Kong that makes digital in the current time frame more relevant. But mail has been traditionally very, very good. And it depends on your budget as well, right? I mean, you can go to TV, and that's pretty expensive. So there are various methods of getting large volumes of individuals in, but you need to understand your budget, your organization, your context, and what might be suitable for your respective organization. Okay, and that's where we, of course, come and help you with.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Next question here is that would you happen to have an analysis of giving trends across different advocacy types, such as children, education, disaster relief, environment, and so on?
Actually, that's a good question, and we do analysis within CSG and with our clients. We of course do have these know-hows when we have seen the trends of different campaigns, the different thematic areas basically, and how they perform in relation to each market. And I've seen this sort of data, publicly available data. There are some sources. Let me see. CAF, I believe, has a giving trends in terms of the SDGs areas. So I saw that report on the website. You might want to go and have a look at that as well. I haven't read through it in detail, but I believe that roughly will give you some data anyway to answer your question.
Thanks, Rodney. Another question is, could you explain some more on what is the difference between unrestricted donations against restricted?
Melanie, maybe I'll pass that to you.
Yep, absolutely. So where we talk about restricted donations, it's typically in relation to grant funding or perhaps government funding, sometimes corporate donations. So it's where the donor at the time of donation stipulates what they want the funds to be used for. So, for example, with grants, we would usually apply for a grant for a specific purpose, perhaps in relation to our legal team, for example. And so the funds will be allocated according to an agreed budget. So we'd say we'd spend X% on salaries, X% on goods, IT, for example, and then a certain percent can be allocated to overheads. But usually the percent that can be allocated to overheads is capped. And it depends on the funder, but anything between 10 and 20% is what I've typically seen. And we are not able to use those funds for any other purposes. The unrestricted funds are funds that can be used for anything because the donor has not stipulated or contracted at the time of donating what we must use them for. So the great benefit of unrestricted funds is that you can use it for the items that are really hard to get to grant funders and corporates and governments to fund. So things like communications, things like IT, things like the fundraising team's salaries, which nobody really wants to fund, they're really hard to get funded. And so if we get donations from members of the public or any other unrestricted format, for example, from events, from other forms, then we can use those to fund the harder to fund areas, so unrestricted. And you can also use unrestricted funds to build up a cash balance to protect your organization in the event that you have a shortfall in funding at some time in the future. Because with restricted funds, typically anything that is not spent on the agreed purpose would have to be returned to the donor, or you could perhaps negotiate an extension, but you can't usually just hold on to them for a rainy day.
Cool. Actually, that's something new for me as well, and I didn't know that distinction. So thanks for that, Melanie. Next question is, how do you reach out to high net worth individuals, and is there any tips to build and maintain that relationships? Or in other words, Greg, how did you get Arnold Schwarzenegger? I think that's another way of phrasing that question.
Again, yes, that was a bit of a catch, wasn't it? But again, Rodney, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, I can comment on that. I think with your question, you already identified the difficulty in terms of trying to identify a high net worth donor or a major gift donor. So it's not an easy exercise. I mean, having been in the role of development managers before and going out to corporates and high net worth individuals to try to get a grant or donation for the organization, it's really quite challenging. It's a sales process. And like any sales process, you also have to work through a funnel. And with that, I mean you have to go through your list of as many individuals as you can potentially find, and as many potential individuals that you believe might have the potential to give to the organization, the interest to give to the organization, and try and speak with them, all right, and try and engage them in a certain way, so that they have an interest, develop an interest with the organization, with the organization's work, and only then will you be able to convince them to make a donation to the organization. So questions arise as to how do you get that list of potential donors that you are going to approach? How do you know whether or not they can be a major giver? What are their financial backgrounds? All of these, ideally, you would need to have a database of history of engagement with them, so that it shows their giving, so that their past giving behavior, even if they're giving small amounts, you might be able to identify through that and through some additional research that they are potential high net worth individual donors that you can try and engage with and have a better chance of success of engagement with. So it comes down to the data again, and it also comes down to, in a way, the volume of donors that you have, and then identifying the subset of high net worth individuals from that volume of mass, supporters or donors that you have. Okay.
I would just add to that.
Yeah.
I would say, just as a tip for if you're starting from a zero base with no data, I think utilizing your networks is by far the most effective and most practical way you can do this. And I think most organizations start off by using their board. They would ask their board to reach out to their wider networks to give an introduction to the organization, to potentially grow relationships with the sorts of people that may become major donors. But it is a slow and quite challenging process.
Thank you.
Cool.
Absolutely.
This next question is particularly for Melanie. So when you say individual giving strategies for small NGOs is a long-term commitment, what is the time period like?
I suppose it depends ultimately on your goal and how much you want to raise and how much budget you have. We, as I mentioned, we've only really started in the last few months, but I would say our forecasts, we're planning for 3 years before we are receiving a significant proportion of our income coming through individual giving. So it has involved the organization having to make financial sacrifices in other areas because it's a huge outlay. We've been planning for this for a couple of years and saving money for it, but I think ultimately it's an ongoing process. So whilst it will take, we think about 3 years to ramp up before it provides a useful proportion of our income. Ultimately, the amount that you can receive will depend on the amount that you can spend on campaigns in different forms. As Rodney said, you can do postal campaigns. We've done online campaigns only at this stage, but there are other options if you want to branch out further. But I would say certainly upwards of 2 or 3 years.
Cool. Next question is, what do you think are the reasons for the low corporate donation trend?
Just from certainly from a Blackbaud study perspective, so we do a lot of studies and sort of research, and I think historically that's been true. So we're probably looking at a lower historical trend, but I think there definitely is an overall trend in terms of individual giving and an increase in corporate fundraising. So I know in talking to Rodney and a lot of discussions we've had with customers and prospective customers across Asia, corporate is increasingly important. And I think this draws on also, in terms of acquisition strategies. If we have, a community fundraising strategy where we can actually work with corporates to come to events, that's a great way for acquisition. So we get them as committed to the cause. They become a team leader, they bring their network in, and if we can capture that information and bring it into eTapestry, there's a great way to actually leverage those corporate relationships. So I think, I think the overall trend is an increasing amount of corporate giving.
Cool. Thanks, Greg. Another question now here. This going towards a more sensitive side. If, say, there's an NGO, smaller NGO that's slowly building their social capital, and they're primarily tackling kind of a highly stigmatized and sensitive topic such as HIV/AIDS, what are the ways that they can strengthen their fundraising portfolio?
I can have a stab at that question. I mean, admittedly, when you're working in sensitive thematic areas, maybe like LGBT rights or HIV and AIDS, in this, getting that broad-based community support is hard, especially if you are in a more conservative society. So, but nevertheless, having said that, you should be able to identify. I mean, it's challenging, but you should still be able to identify sectors of the population that will engage with you. And like Melanie says, you should start with having an organizational strategy whereby you populate your organizational members, such as the board members, any advisory boards, etc., with people who are supportive of that cause, and through their networks and friends, you should be able to identify more and more people who are, supportive of your sensitive cause, the cause in that area. So that's how you build it step by step, and I suppose without too much sort of sensitivity or ruffling of feathers if the topic is sensitive in your community, right? So in a way, that is a more under the radar approach, if you would, of building out your network and your support for your organization.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I'd
Thanks,
add
Greg.
to that, we work with a number of those types of organisations here in Australia and across Asia. So I would say, it's diversity. It's an increasingly talked about thing. We need diversity. And often as not-for-profits, we're good at telling our stories, and particularly in this sensitive area, if we can tell our stories, but also back that up with the impact we're making in terms of changing lives, I think that can really add some really strong sense of connection to your cause. So yeah, that's the only thing I would add to that.
Thanks, guys. I am being conscious of the time, and I know we're a little over time now. So let's just answer a few more questions, and maybe some of these questions we can tackle over the email, or we can tackle over email, or
Sure.
attendees can just reach back
sure
to you
can.
guys. Yep. Okay, a few last questions. First is, coming from Melanie's talk earlier, part of that conversation was the organization being able to make a significant financial investment in marketing and consultants. Now, do you have alternative recommendations if they're coming from an NGO that's primarily just operating on volunteers and they don't necessarily have that kind of funds for investing?
I would look at it. I'm not sure what country this organization is in, but there are, in most countries, there are organizations that provide free consultancy and guidance services to NGOs, and potentially even internationally. So it may be worth looking into whether they can contact one of these organizations. Certainly in Hong Kong, I know there are a few that run training sessions on how to do that as a starting point. I think, and then again, I would say also just leveraging your networks if possible. So again, I don't know what structure this organization has, but to the extent that they could leverage the networks of their board or their personal organization, perhaps to get an initial investment through personal connections to perhaps kick off a campaign, and then hopefully that would become at least self-sustaining in the shorter to medium term. Rodney, I don't know if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, I do. For small, it's always a challenge to get investment for a fundraising or marketing initiative. There's no question. But if you're primarily running on volunteers, you probably need to start off somewhere. And I think starting off with a data system is always a sound strategy. And I mean, eTapestry and what Blackbaud, what Greg is representing, I mean, it's a relatively affordable solution. But even if that solution is out of your reach, say, you could very much go back to the basics and just use your Excel, which is pretty much sort of free, or even access. So these sort of software is out there for you to. It has to be a much more manual process, but I think you need to start collecting your data in that way. And you could potentially, there are other platforms, free to use platforms online available these days as well. For example, if you are running a small walkathon, for example, of maybe just less than 100 people, and your one volunteer fundraiser is doing it, and you could actually use online platforms such as Simply Giving or Just Giving, and from there on, you have the option to download the data sets of all of your supporters and already start compiling a small database for your organization. So I would say that if you are really stretched, you could look at these sort of initiatives that you could leverage on the free to use online platforms. And just to keep the scale small, everyone starts small. It's not a problem to start small, but just start somewhere and make sure you collect all your data, and that's how you do about it in a systematic way. And that's the key, I would say.
Thanks, guys. Again, going back to the issue of time here, I'll just raise a couple of last questions, then we'll just answer others over email. One of these is, do you have any advice for converting a large social media following, such as in Facebook or Instagram, into active donors?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I understand where you're coming from. A lot of your traditional advertising agencies will ask you to accumulate a community of Facebook followers and likes on the social media platform. The issue is conversion, right? You might have the community there, but they don't really convert. I think initially you might want to try and do some simple conversion messages or posting out to see how you do. You're very likely to get quite a low conversion rate, but it's worth trying anyway. Okay, because not all those who are, to be honest, not all those who are on your Facebook page will necessarily convert. Okay, so you might want to gauge as to how many, and you would like to probably repeat that messaging for quite a few times, because the post that you post is not necessarily viewed by all of your followers at the time that you post it. So you might have to repeat that over a period of time, but repeat that messaging again. And then after you've done that, then you're getting a better idea of how many is converting. I think you should try to do that first before you engage further in terms of media buy and so on, which is what Mel and Melanie Justice Center has been doing with us. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Rodney. And just the last question here. I think this is more for Greg. Using through Blackbaud, through eTapestry, how do you filter for donors that are just testing, whether the credit card is functioning right, or avoid funders that could be deemed as money laundering or deemed to be investing for terrorist groups or any fraudulent?
It's a great question at the moment, yeah. So I guess because we're the largest provider of cloud-based software for social good, we make an enormous investment around that. So we work with our payment gateway providers. We have internal teams that are constantly monitoring our customers' websites, to be able to, help control and manage all that. So yeah, look, it's a major challenge, but something where we invest heavily in, and so we've got a lot of tools and facilities that we are able to apply to assist with that. Look, there's reams of information around that I can share, so happy to share that further if required. But yeah, that's definitely a hot area and an area we invest heavily in to protect our customers' interests in that.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. And now that unfortunately we're already 15 minutes over time, and I do understand that there's still a handful of questions in the questions booth. Well, I'll make sure to extract those, and I'll make sure to have answers for those at the follow-up email or beyond that. But nonetheless, thank you guys. Thank you to our speakers, Rodney, Melanie, and Greg, and everyone who attended. Thank you very much. You can't expect to get the link to the decks and the recording within 1 to 2 days once we've uploaded it. And guys, again, thank you very much. And please feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. All right.
Thanks, Jed.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jed. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Mel.